Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another week. Uh, let's get started. Discussion about the purpose of school, the point of the role of the teacher. Great discussion this week. So many interesting points that have come up. And it's really interesting to me that while you were having that discussion, I went this week to my son's Meet the Teacher night. He's in the seventh grade. He's 12. And I met all of his teachers. And essentially, the question that was discussed in every teacher was my son and his peers that are in pre AP. They're in the seventh grade, but they're going to be taking the eighth grade end of the year tests at the end of this year, which means all of his teachers are trying to condense 2 years of material into 1 year. I'm not entirely sure what the legislative decision was there, but that's the reality. His math teacher told us in his class, and it made me think of our discussion. He essentially said, he asked the parents two things. I need our kids to have better discipline because I can't waste any time in this course correcting behavior because there's too much to cover. And two, I'm trying to teach the kids that if they come across something that they don't understand intellectually, just put it in the calculator and move on. The calculator will give you the right answer. So essentially what he meant in that comment was, it is a higher priority that they complete their work in a timely manner than that they understand the material conceptually, like the mathematic concept that's being put across. Say, for instance, like how to subtract a -3 minus -3 is 6, not 0, or whatever. First of all, I don't blame the teacher. I think he's doing the best he can with the situation that was handed to him, which is cover 2 years of material in a year. But it is such a useful example I give in order to sort of illustrate that point I said of bureaucratic administration. Clearly, the goal in that class and in that school is let's administer the bureaucracy of school, and whether or not kids understand what they're doing is secondary to can they perform test work at a level that doesn't get us shut down. And I think it's troubling, but it gets to the conversation that we've been having here about the purpose of school. Now, a few of you said some things that I found interesting. One of the things I'd like to suggest, the purpose of school, and whether you like this or not, it is a reality. Part of school is about social order. It is about maintaining social order. That has to do with discipline, that has to do with sort of who gets filled into what slots as adults. And one of the arguments goes that the purpose of public education is to fill that role, to streamline the process of getting everybody to behave as adults and getting everybody to fill the roles that they should fill as adults. Now, this is in the History of Ed PowerPoint, we talked about the social efficiency movement. Which is part of that, right? If you're qualified to be really little more than a bus driver, you shouldn't be taking physics and classes that like the future president might take. You should be taking the classes you need to get out of school and start driving buses. Now, and please don't hear me disparaging that. My father was a bus driver when I was in middle school. So I use that as sort of like a blue collar example of something that's familiar. And then another concept that I think is useful in your brain is this idea of a surplus labor force. The basic function of capitalism, and this is free of critique at this point, the basic function of capitalism is to have more workers than jobs. If you need 10 people to fill to fill your teaching positions, it provides you more opportunity if you have 50 people applying for those 10 jobs. You then have all the power to pick who you want, to find the most attractive candidate, and you have the most power to get rid of people who don't do what you say. Now, if you're a Marxist, you're going to critique that system and say you're giving undue authority to the owners of production. If you are a free market capitalist, you're going to say that's where competition comes from, and that's the exact point. So the structure of capitalism, the way I just described it, that is ideology free, that I'm offering it to you. That is the way our financial and our sort of economic system works. You must have more workers than jobs available. Now, Bowles and Gintis published a book called Schooling in a Capitalist Society. They make the argument that the point of school is essentially to produce that surplus labor force. We need to have more people capable of doing the work than we have work available. Most of you, though, in your discussion, thought about school entirely differently. You don't think the purpose of school is that. You don't think you're going to work every day to make sure that you have the surplus labor force. Like that, nobody used that phrase. I'm thinking probably because I hadn't given it to you yet, or you haven't seen it yet, but also just that thematically, that's not what anybody talked about. You all essentially said that the purpose of school is to disseminate on a large scale an education. And then what got interesting in your conversations was there was some disagreement or some variation on what you thought an education was or where an education could come from. And what I'd like you to think about this week as we move toward the second half of the semester is, can you receive an education without school at all? Now, think of a couple pop culture examples. The first is the movie Into the Wild. Into the Wild, if you haven't read the book or watched the movie, the kid goes out into he has an Emory education, he has a trust fund, he sets fire to it all, and he goes out into the wild. And the essential point he makes in that book in that book and movie is, nothing I learned in a book can hold up to the value of what I learned out in the wild, right? Like learning is out experiencing, learning is out having life. And that book knowledge is irrelevant. Now, the great irony then of the story is that he gets the wrong information from a book, eats the wrong berry, and dies. Spoiler alert if you haven't watched it or read it. And it's been out for 10 years. There's a statute of limitation on spoilers. If you don't know that yet, I judge you. So that's one to think about. Another example is the movie Good Will Hunting with Matt Damon, when he's having this scene in the bar and Ben Affleck's trying to hit on Minnie Driver, and this prick with a ponytail from Harvard comes up and tries to put him in his place. And Matt Damon shows up. I love Matt Damon. Let's get used to that idea right now. Matt Damon shows up and says, I've read everything you're going to read. I've never been to Harvard, but here's what you think you know. Here's what you think you're going to know next semester because you're going to read Gordon Wood, and on and on and on. But the great line he uses is, at some point you're going to wake up in your life and realize you spent $100,000 on a Harvard education that you could have gotten from $1.25 in overdue fines from the library. That is such an interesting